If we can get the panelists to come and sit and everyone else to find seats. Is anyone missing a friend that was going to be sitting next to them? You're missing one. I'm going to turn off as I go. I'm going to project first. Thank you everyone so much for coming out to the first of our two-part Quilt Talk series, Quilted with Care, a 1996 retrospective of the Quilted with Care fundraiser. It's really exciting that Brigid reached out and wanted to share this very exciting piece of local history while we have the Not So Fast Patchwork of Tompkins County quilt exhibit up in the museum. A lot of folks were asking how long the display will be up. We actually just expanded the exhibit and it will be coming down in the fall, either in October or November. So you have a whole extra season of friends visiting. And if you want to come in anytime, we always have chairs available. You can sit in front of your favorite quilt and figure out how to recreate patterns of the 1830s. But one of the things that I find the most amazing about this exhibit, I'm the Director of Community Outreach here for the History Center. My name is Zoe Van Nostrand, so I can't take any credit for the curation or the archives, but some of the ways we talk about the exhibit, the way that we recognize that we are looking at works that were created more than 200 years ago, but it's a craft that has been practiced continuously in Tompkins County until now. There are very few things that we can say that about that are in our collections. That the quilt work that you do, the quilt work that was done in 1996, it is the same type of craft that was practiced here more than 200 years ago. And very often, there is little record of the quilters' lives other than the finished pieces that they left to us. And so that's a really powerful thing to remember. So I'm not gonna go on too much. I'm gonna help get the mic set up, but then we're really gonna let Brigid walk through some memories of Quilted with Care. The panelists are gonna share some of their remembrances. And also, if you brought any quilts, there's gonna be an opportunity for the quilt share as well. But thank you guys so much for coming, really appreciate it.
And here we go. Can everyone hear in the back? Sound matters. It's so nice to be able to have a sound carry. Thank you so much, Zoe. You know, women have been stitching their lives and their hearts into quilts for as long as they've been making them, American women, and their hopes and their dreams and their hardships and sorrows. And I think about that and this continuation, rather, like Zoe said, about all these 200 years, and so it was with Quilted with Care. Really the magic and wonder and convergence of all the reasons people make quilts. And then breast cancer, and at that time being spoken in very hushed tones. And so tonight is the story of that coming together. And we have McLaughlin and Andi Gladstone, who are two of the founders of the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance. And then we have Kristin Thompson, who is one of the lead organizers of Quilted with Care as a Tompkins County Quilters Guild member. And then Bryn Sig has since moved away, another organizer. And many in the audience were organizers as well. So we're really looking forward to hearing everyone share their memories about this amazing, incredible happening. And I think it's interesting to think that 27 years later, not only are we sharing memories of it, but we're still finding out more about its impact and its importance and its lasting influence on our lives in many ways. And when you see some of these quilts come in and know that they've been hanging in people's homes for 27 years, that's really, really special. Thank you again to the History Center. I think any of you who have seen the exhibit, I'm awestruck that we have this place and space, and we're right now in the Community Arts Partnership space, and that they have put on this level of exhibit in our community is quite amazing. So we're gonna Ann and Andi are going to set the stage for us of Ithaca breast cancer at that time, because I think we forget how far we've come with the issue of breast cancer. And then Kristin will talk a little bit about the Tompkins County Quilters Guild and the long-time commitment since its very beginning of serving community in many ways. So Ann and Andi, do you want to start?
I'm going to start a little bit about talking about what it was like to be. Oh,
You've
sorry,
got a mic.
How's this? Is this better? Okay. So I was diagnosed in 1991, so 32 years ago. So a lot has changed, thank goodness. I'm Ann McLaughlin. I'm one of the founders of the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance, and then became the Director of Client Services for a number of years. I also want to just say that the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance, we called it that for about 12 or 13 years, and then it is now called the Cancer Resource Center of the Finger Lakes. So if you're going to go out and look for the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance, it's not there, it's now the Cancer Resource Center. A little bit of history of what a breast cancer diagnosis looked like in 1991. And I'm sure some of you have had similar experiences or back then, or know of somebody who did have experiences that long ago with cancer. But 1991 was the olden days. I mean, there was a total resource vacuum. There was no way to get information because there was no internet. There was no way to connect with other women because there was no social media. And at 39, I didn't know anyone who had cancer, never mind breast cancer. So it was it was a different time. Back then, even if you went to the doctors, there was not a lot of dialoguing going back and forth between the doctor and the patient. It was pretty much you went in and listened, and whatever they said to you is what you came out knowing. But that whole dynamic has changed in the interim as well. So I was 39 years old. I had 2 young children. It was lonely, it was scary, and it was humiliating because nobody spoke of breast cancer. People didn't even speak of cancer, but certainly not breast cancer. And a lot of what was connected with cancer was you brought this on yourself. So it wasn't something that you really shared and went out of your way to share with anybody. To make matters worse, there were all kinds of roadblocks back then. I decided to get 2 surgical opinions, which was not the norm back then. And I went to the first surgeon. I had an appointment with him, talked to him, and as I was leaving, I said, I'm also going for a second surgical opinion. And he looked at me and he said, well, if you do that, I will not be your surgeon. So that was easy for me to decide which surgeon I was going to. Scheduling surgery was also a huge challenge. I was needed to wait 6 to 8 weeks after I was diagnosed before surgery. And you know, by the time you figure that you're not sleeping for 8 weeks and you're not eating and you're in a huge, terrible state of affairs. So I started going down to the surgeon's office and talking to the receptionist. And I kept saying, do you have any cancellations? You know, I would really don't want to wait 8 weeks, because 8 weeks would have put me at Christmas. And I didn't want to disrupt the kids' lives anymore. And I said, you know, isn't there any way the doctor can see me for surgery any earlier? As it turned out, I did get in about 4 weeks, thank goodness. And before surgery, I had to decide whether I was going to have a lumpectomy or a mastectomy. Those were the days where you made this decision based on almost no information. And I spent hours one night with my friend and neighbor, Sharon, agonizing over the pros and cons of whether to get a lumpectomy or mastectomy. And basically I was making this decision all by myself in a vacuum. Back then, there was also, when you had breast cancer surgery, they often removed, or they always did, removed all of your lymph nodes from your arm on the side of surgery. And that was the protocol back then. It's not now. But that can cause all sorts of long-term complications. So these are just some of the issues that one dealt with back before there was an Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance. I do want to say that I did stay in Ithaca for my treatment, primarily because I had young kids, and my support system, my friends, my husband, my kids were all in Ithaca, and I didn't really want to be out of town on my own. I stayed in Ithaca, but I do want to say I had an excellent local surgeon and an excellent local oncologist. After my diagnosis and treatment, I knew that I had to be part of changing the landscape of breast cancer. But it was really Andi Gladstone who took the bull by the horns and conceived of the idea of creating a community resource to address everyone who'd been affected by breast cancer. So, Andi, you can talk about the Breast Cancer Alliance.
Yes, hi, I'm Andi Gladstone. Well, just on a personal note, just very briefly, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in New York City. And I made a couple of calls. A friend of a friend had breast cancer, and she said, oh, there's an organization called SHARE. You should call them. This was the day I was diagnosed. I called them, somebody picked up the phone, and they said, I was just diagnosed with breast cancer, and they said, oh, we have a newly diagnosed support group starting tomorrow. And I went, and that was it. I was connected. I had people to talk to. I had help finding doctors. I had help finding information. It was the opposite of what Anne went through around the same time. It was 1992. When I came back to Ithaca, a very close friend who I'm sure most of you know, because everybody knows her, Ned Asta, got diagnosed with breast cancer. And I said, oh, okay, let's find the local group and, let's get connected. And of course there was nothing. And there was a statewide hotline that knew nothing about around here. Of course we tried to call the American Cancer Society and didn't get back. And so it was basically Ned and I going through it. We had, there were two of us, but we didn't know anything about how to do this. So in the December of 1993, late one night, we had this idea of let's just try to form a network, just so people can talk to each other. And we found Anne, and we found the other founding members through various ways, and we met for at least a year every week to plan this because one of the things that happens, and I'm sure many people have this experience too, is when you get a diagnosis, you spend a lot of time waiting to hear back from organizations, from doctors, from labs, and we didn't want to be one of those places that people were waiting to hear back from, so we really wanted to be organized. So we spent a year organizing before we actually went public, and in that time we had set up already, before we even advertised, we had support group facilitators, we had trained some patient advocates to go to the surgeon's office like Anne was doing by herself to try to get an appointment. we had some basic things, and we knew about how many people were diagnosed in a year in Tompkins. We looked up the number, and we thought we were pretty well prepared. And once we got a phone number that we publicized, we were kind of like, we were amazed at how many people we heard from, way more than we had expected in the beginning. And that's because there were so many people in Tompkins County that had been diagnosed 2 years before, 3 years before, had never told anybody, were living with this, had gone through it, and then were living with it all by themselves, and were just waiting to meet other people. So we had the yearly statistics, but this was more than just 1 year. We also heard a lot from people who had been through a breast cancer scare and had not been diagnosed, but they had been in that system, and that was quite dysfunctional. And then we heard from family members also. We basically designed our early services based on what we wished we had had. I mean, that it was very personal, you know, and we were a group and we just did that. And we were pretty busy right from the beginning. We were very busy right from the beginning in this little tiny office behind Kinko's, in a building behind Kinko's. Ithaca Ray Prices gave us a little office. And it was a little tiny room, a lot of boxes, and one desk, one chair. We had to take turns being there, because there wasn't room for 2 of us in there. But we were still in that circle of people that had wanted to connect, that were looking for something. Look, this is too soon. Okay, so we'll go on to that later, about how it changed after the quilters stepped in and took us to a whole other level.
Thank you so much, Ann and Andi, for sharing that. It's even going back that many years, it's new all over again when you remember something like that, so thank you so much. Kristin, will you share with us just your experience and coming into the community and coming into the Tompkins County Quilters Guild?
So I'm Kristin Thompson, and I moved to Ithaca in 1995 with 2 small children, and I was a former nurse, and 1995 was the year that Quilters Corner opened in Ithaca. Happy me. So I went there, and somehow I got slurped up into Quilters Corner, and I've been working for Quilters Corner for probably about 27, 25 something years, a long time. And at the same time, I met Bryn Sig with, our children went to St. Paul's, to the preschool there. And Bryn brought me into the Tompkins County Quilters Guild. And I have been an active member of the guild ever since. And the guild, our guild, is what we discovered is there was one group in the country that called themselves a club. You guys can correct me if I'm remembering this right, but we are the oldest guild in the country. And we were established in 1974. And so next year is our 50th anniversary of being a guild. So, and I'm here as kind of a proxy for all of the people who were involved in the Ithaca, or Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance, or the quilt auction. And it was Brigid who who came to the Guild, because she knew Anne, and she said, you know, let's do something to help them out. And so, of course, that's what we did. You know, we just stepped right in there and we said, we are women who get it, and we just wanted to help, and there was no hesitation. We just jumped right in. And so I'm just a proxy. I played a small part, I think, in it. There were so many people involved in the organization of this quilt auction. So lots of the members made quilts, little quilts, and we planned this whole event where, you know, we had an auctioneer. What was her name? Peggy. Oh, she was wonderful. And she, yeah, we had. It was just such a great thing, and just everybody was really, you know, the community came out and just supported. You know, it just meant so much to so many people. And I have one real recollection of bidding on one quilt. There was one quilt that I really truly loved. It was made by a little boy, and I think for his as I thought more about it, it was made in memory of or for his grandmother who had breast cancer. And I just loved it. It was just so adorable. It was sweet and made by a little boy, and I loved it. And I have two little boys. And anyway, so I'm starting to bid on it and bid, and I kept bidding on it. And Brynn comes over to me and she said, "You know who you're bidding against?" I said, "No." She said, "That's Wegmans." So I stopped bidding, but why didn't I stop bidding? You know, it's like I should have bid that thing right up. But so that was one good recollection I had of the thing. But it just resonated. The whole idea of it resonated with us as women, and you know, the Guild just stepped up and did it, and that's what we do. We do so many other. Do you want me to talk about that, or am I moving? Am I talking too long?
No, you're all right. Do you want to just talk about service projects just a little bit?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Then we'll move back and
So so that was one thing, and then we went through this whole thing. We raised a huge amount of money. We were kind of actually surprised by how much money we made, and then we did it all over again. So. And then I think that money actually afforded the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance the ability to not worry about their rent or paying for their bills, or, you know, they could just focus on providing the services that they wanted to give, and what that was the important thing. So it gave them a kind of breathing space. So yeah, it was really important to us and to them, and so that's just part of what the Guild does. The Guild does so many service projects, and one I'll just tell you a number of them. The at-risk babies and children's quilts. We've done probably thousands of quilts that we have donated for children who are at risk, babies and children who are at risk. We've done preemie quilts for the hospitals that they're given out to the preemie babies. And we've done bags for the Cancer Resource Center. Afghan spearheads that. And actually the bags are used for people. They just bring, you know, the things that they need, you know, a book or whatever they can take to their treatments. We do pillow ports. I brought one today. These are these little pillows that you put on a seat belt for people who have a port. Yeah, a port, and it's kind of sensitive there. So when you have a seat belt on, it hurts. So these are made to just go over the seat belt and protect your port and be more comfortable. And then we've done a lot of quilts for ALS. We had a guild member whose daughter died of ALS, and so they had a Hopes and Dreams Quilt Challenge, and then the ALS organization. So they have collected, and we've just made a lot of quilts for that organization over the years, and they're sort of like lap quilts that people can use in wheelchairs. And then we do quilts of valor too, that we do for service people and our service members and veterans. And I know, I don't know, there's more things too probably that we do, but it's just a sharing of just sharing our skills and our talents, and you know, when the call comes in, we answer the call. So
Thanks so much, Kristin. Going back to 1995, because even though the auction happened in 96, we got started in 95. Ann, do you remember coming onto the playground and the two of us connecting? I don't know if it was that very moment that we decided that Quilted with Care had to happen, but
Yeah, so our kids have been in preschool together and all the way through high school together. So we were seeing each other on the playground a lot. I do remember, I don't remember being on the playground with you, I do remember you coming into the Breast Cancer Alliance office, and you had a quilt from Bryn Sig and one from Marion DeGloria. And those are the first two quilts you brought into the office to show us. They were little darling Christmas quilts. And those are the first two, and I don't remember what the date was that you brought those in, but those are the first two I remember seeing.
it's amazing thinking back and how it all came together in that way. But in the moments after Ann shared her diagnosis, and I didn't know anyone at that time who had been affected, but knew it was out there. Of course, we all did, and I just thought how extraordinary that women who have been affected are coming together to help each other at this time when they are having such a challenging time. And so of course it was, well, the rest of us have to do something to help. The rest of us have to do something to support them. And the combination, of course, of quilt making and all that women pour their lives into quilts, and the combination of here are these extraordinary women, and we have to do something. And of course, going back to the Quilters Guild, you know, the power of a dream, it's extraordinary to look back in the books and see how much work went into all of that and putting out the word for quilts, and it was immediate, and that people started to send in quilts. Today we could tell 122 stories. That's how many quilts in the final. I think we were actually at the final auction when the last one came in.
The two last ones, 121 and 122, came in right as we were getting ready for the auction.
It's amazing, amazing. And I have to say again, while Kristin doesn't remember doing much, it really was a lot from a lot of people, and a lot from Ithaca Breast Cancer as well. So we've got a little slideshow for you with not all 122 quilts, but some of them and some of the stories that go with them, and so wonderfully many in the audience have their stories as well. So we'll go through those and share. Am I too close to the mic, or is it? Okay. Yeah. That's where we begin. So interestingly, the story of Quilted with Care begins with something you don't hear much about, the raffle quilt. And Elsie Dentis was a very active member of Guild, a graphic artist before she was a quilt maker, and my goodness was she an extraordinary quilt maker. And this, even though Baltimore album style quilts are a quilt design that is quite traditional, she designed her own quilt. And this is the first one that you're seeing here. You can also see a second and a third, and how many do you guess are out there? Yes, people bought raffle tickets, but then they wanted to make the quilt. And so finally, Quilters Corners ended up carrying the pattern. And this is one that was done by Casey Carr, a sister quilt of Floral Splendor. And this is another one, and this one, who was this one, Chris? Kathy Carmen, and Kathy Carmen made this one, and that is such a wonderful legacy item. This quilt raised more than $5,000 for the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance as a raffle, and we felt that it was really important to have a raffle quilt because, you know, there were only 122 quilts to go around, and we wanted everyone to have an opportunity. Cheryl Sinkow, who took the photograph of Floral Splendor, also took a photograph of each of the 9 people who made the blocks. So it was Quilters Guild members who made each of the blocks. It's kind of fun to see there. You see Barbara Dimmick, who's still a very active member of the Guild there, and a founding member of the Guild. And Bryn Sig, right above Barb, who was one of the very active other ones, is Judy Heath. And Judy was, I think, Quilters Corners founder? Was
Quilts and Things.
Quilts and Things before that. Okay,
Right.
got it. Thank
And
you.
Judy was a breast cancer survivor.
Yes.
And Judy was a breast cancer survivor. It was a wonderful group of people. So Floral Splendor tickets went out, and then we planned all along that we would do the drawing at the auction. So it's amazing to think of how all these pieces came together, and that's part of the wonder and magic of it all, is that they did. The first thing that happened is, I'm really still surprised at this, is that we thought about, well, where will we have them auctioned, and how, you know, if you just have one night of an auction, we're not going to get as much money as we really think these small quilts will be valued. Once they started to come in, they were these beautiful little treasures, and we had invited everyone to tell their stories with the small quilts, to make a small quilt, and then to tell about yourself and how breast cancer had touched your life, knowing that every single person would have a story that went with it. And because Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance was such a fledgling organization, and because of the quiet illness of it, that it was spoken of in hushed tones. It was spoken of in hushed tones. And so I didn't have an expectation when I went to Wegmans and asked, well, maybe I did have an expectation. I thought, so Gary Willison, who was the manager of Wegmans at the time, was his own Wegmans champion, you know, and he believed in Wegmans as a center of a community, and that each of the Wegmans would, in each community, do what was best for that community. He believed in that so much. And so when we began to talk about what the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance was going to do in their vision and hope for supporting in the community, and that wouldn't these small quilts look wonderful hanging at Wegmans, and couldn't, at the service center, they have bid books where people could bid on them. I mean, really. And Gary said yes, and that he would. And so right above the freezer section, there were about 120 quilts. And indeed, you could go up to the service desk. And that's the more to the story of Kristin having to bid against Wegmans. I'll tell you more to the story as we go along. And so there those quilts hung, and of course that wasn't enough for us to have people bid on them there. Then they went downtown Ithaca. There were at least 50 in downtown Ithaca in different locations where you could walk along and see them and continue to bid. And then the opening of Quilters Corners. And there were quilts there outside. So all around the community you could bid on these quilts. And Andi, the visibility of it, didn't that begin then to actually make this organization more visible? And people began to say breast cancer out loud. It's quite amazing to think about it. And then we go back to all those things we know about the warmth and beauty of quilts. And that the warmth and beauty of quilts brought people together and brought a subject that was underground, really more up to the focus. So
I just wanted just to add
Yeah,
on.
please.
The publicity that came from the quilt auction was what it really opened up because it was so interesting and fascinating that the Ithaca Journal, the Ithaca Times, everybody was covering it, and the pictures were beautiful. So there was a lot of publicity, and the publicity was really instrumental in getting the word of the Breast Cancer Alliance out there. And just having people talk about it without having it be hushed. They were talking about quilts. They weren't necessarily talking about breast cancer per se, but everyone knew that it was for the Breast Cancer Alliance. So it was an important fundraiser, I say, but it was more than a fundraiser. It was a community event.
right, yeah, a community happening, a community awareness. It just unpacking all that it was and why that it happened that way is quite amazing. And as I said, we're still learning. This is downtown Ithaca on the Commons, and you can see Floral Splendor. You could buy a raffle ticket if you couldn't bid, if the quilts were already going high enough. There it is. So all of this, we were so bold to not end with a silent auction at a moment or time. We just decided we have to bring people together. Anne saying this was so much more than a fundraiser, and it was just on every level so much more. Awareness raiser, friendship builder, even seeing the women's community building that we convened there just touches our hearts, doesn't it? And so we designed a gala event, the final auction. Come for the final auction and the gala event, and restaurants in the community donated desserts. And you can see how all around the walls, those small quilts were all around the whole walls, and so was the desserts, and so was wine. And I think everyone, you can't see anyone in the room here yet. There's Anne and Andi and me taking the stage, probably saying more words than were needed at the time. And Floral Splendor. And we even brought in women to do some entertainment. The young group, the young women below who were so touched at being there were the Nothing But Treble from Cornell University, a women's group, women's a cappella, and above is Margaret Wakely Harris. And you can see the audience. More audience. Everyone talked about the feeling in the room being exceptional, just that feeling of we're all together, like we're all doing this. There were some people who had been affected by breast cancer and some people many who had not, and everyone just came together. And they bid. And Peggy Haynes, and she actually is an auctioneer, and this is Isis that you'll see a little later. This is, I think this was 122, Anne. Mary Milne, an extraordinary fabric artist. Okay. And again, I wish that I had all 122 photos, but I'll take you through a couple of these so that you can enjoy them. This is a folk art applique, and it was done by Amelia Wheeler, and who has since passed away. And Amelia says, in many ways, I feel like I, as a lifetime sewer, have come home with quilting. I don't remember that I was working on anything special when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, but I had many quilts in mind. I couldn't be sick for long. Having something, quilts and quilting, to look forward to helped a lot. And that's Amelia's. And this is Denise Lentini's Pansies and Primroses. That's appliqued. And Denise says, this quilt is dedicated to two very special women who valiantly fought a battle against breast cancer, although the cancer won. Their bravery and strength and courage will always be how I'll remember them. And she says that it was Diane Okama and Mary Stebbins were two very special, talented women whose lives were taken too soon. And Denise's pansies and primroses were another quilt that Wegmans was bidding on. And the story that I found out more recently was that Gary Willison sent two women from Wegmans to the auction, to the final auction, and Gary Willison said to them, "Don't come back without quilts." And so there they were. And Primroses was up to $300, and then it was up to $350, and they were like, "Wait, he didn't know it was going to be this much. Should we spend this much money? What should we do?" And it was such a quandary for them. And it ended up going up to $400, and they did come home with that quilt to Wegmans, to Gary, and the tulips as well. And those two small quilts hung the entire time Gary was there. He was so proud of them. And Gary, in his final article about the work that he had done at Wegmans, included his pride in Quilted with Care and being a part of that in his final statement about things he had done from community. So that in itself too is just another layer and level about how we are all so connected and so beautiful, and the uplift of Quilted with Care. Denise is so funny in talking about her quilt going for that much, because like everyone had donated their quilts, but no one expected them quite to be going as high as they were. Okay, this is Beth Osterman's Reflections, and Reflections is here, and Lydia Pettis brought it and has something too to say about it. I'll just read that Beth says that my dear friend Barbara passed away in 1991, 5 months after I moved to Ithaca to be near her. That's Beth Osterman's. And Lydia, would you tell us about the quilt and seeing it? Just gonna pass the mic.
So did everyone see the quilt and see that this is Lydia's? Thank you.
Yeah, so I arrived at the Women's Community Building, and I took a spin around the room, checking out all the quilts. And I saw this, and I just thought, oh, that's the one for me. Now at the time, the frog buttons were not on it. And I looked at that and I said, that quilt needs frogs. So I sought out the woman who made it, and I carefully explained to her that the quilt needed frogs. And I saw this on one of the preview days. On auction day, I saw it, and I saw that there were frogs. I said, that's my quilt. The bidding on this, I must say, was pretty fierce. I was bidding against somebody who I'm sure ended up being totally annoyed that I kept besting their offer. But it brings me a lot of joy. And if there are any quilters in the room, my dragonfly in the lost decade lost a wing. And if anybody can give me some advice on how to find a wing for my dragonfly, I'll be very appreciative.
I wonder if you might need a whole new dragonfly, Lydia. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Well, a new dragonfly would work too.
It's so wonderful that you came and brought this quilt with you so that we saw it before that day and heard your story behind it. Thank you so much for sharing that. This is a spring floral basket, and Enid Zolweg made this quilt. I believe it kept going higher and higher and higher, and I think reached almost $500. Isn't it just gorgeous? Gorgeous, gorgeous. And that is Ann's.
Did you know that was mine?
I did know it was yours, but I didn't get to choose which ones there were photographs of. Ann, will you tell us about that one? And you just,
I don't know when I can tell you about it, but I saw it and I loved it. And it's sweet, it's little pinwheels, and it hangs in our bedroom. And I love the pastel colors, and I love that it's sort of, what would you say, it's not flat. How would you, it's puffy, yeah.
it's quilted and, yeah.
Yeah, and I love it. I didn't know you had a picture there.
Who made it?
Oh, yes.
It was made by Meredith Davis. Sorry about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
This is Ariel.
This is Ariel and called Handed Down. And each of these, and I love knowing actually Burn Fireside, is that? Brian is who ended up getting this quilt. So she's had it all these years, and each, I don't know if you can see quite some of the writings, but one is finished, is better than perfect. Peace, of course, and many other, it's just a stunning quilt, and I love thinking about it being out there. And Ariel says, 2 of my husband's sisters have been dealing with breast cancer. Both have undergone double mastectomies and reconstructive surgery. They're currently leading very full and very busy and vital lives. That was the hope and dreams of quilts. And then Pomegranate was made by Eleanor Abbott. Sharon, you ended up getting Pomegranate. Would you tell us about that?
And it's here. Does everyone see the picture?
So I was diagnosed, well, the abnormal mammogram was in the June of '96. And it took until September for the final surgery. I worked in the health department as a nurse, and I was out of work then for, well, from September until about November. I think I went back to work right after the auction. I'm very nervous. It's very emotional. But anyway, I saw this at Wegmans, and I knew it was mine. And I was still working at that time. I hadn't had my final surgery at that point. So all of my coworkers knew that was the one I wanted. I knew where it was going to hang in my house. So when I went to the auction, I sat right up front, raising my hand, bidding and bidding, with somebody else behind me, bidding and bidding. And finally I thought, yeah, forget it. So I went back to work right after the auction. And wonderful co-workers, friends, had a breakfast for me and gave me this wall hanging. So they passed the hat around the first time, but then because I didn't stop bidding, they passed it around again. And I have to say, stoic might be how you would describe me during this whole process. I was quiet. I kept a lot to myself, some with Ann. But the day that my friends gave me that quilt, the dam broke. And I was a visiting nurse, so I would go out in the county car. Well, that day I pulled over the side of the road many times to cry. And it's a treasure.
It is a treasure, Sharon. Thank you for sharing the story behind it. It's amazing to see all the quilts that were there, and then they started again in their beauty and influence where they went. And so this is such a special memory lane trip. This was a quilt called Farm, made by Jessica Drennan. And Jessica was a young, just married quilt maker who joined the guild. And the rest of us with children at the time We're just so lucky to have Jessica, and an extraordinary quilt maker. I think you can tell by her applique how amazing she was. This was a really special one. I'm glad we have a photograph of it. And I don't know where that, I think I have a name somewhere of where that one was, but it wasn't a recognizable name. This is Korea, October, that's Lise Bronfenbrenner's. Lise is just had her 100th birthday revisiting of all of her fabric art. That couldn't happen on her 100th birthday, that happened on her 102nd birthday. And she was making quilts and wall hangings till not too long ago, but isn't this just amazing? And it was more beautiful in person, yeah, it was really just gorgeous, gorgeous. This is Fruit Platter that Elsie Dentis created. It's a little, the photograph's not great, but look at those fabrics that Elsie was really known for all of the textured fabrics that she would use, visually textured. And this one is the stunning Tree of Life, just simple and beautiful. And Margaret Day is the person who made it, and she says, I was very close to my sister. And feel the loss to this day. Her death helped me keep what is important in my life in mind and in perspective. So gorgeous. And this is Ina Boda's Mammy's flower garden. And she says, my mother had breast cancer and now my sister has it. We keep praying and hoping, and so far she's doing okay. Is Mary Milne here? Mary Milne is here. All right, Mary. So, I don't know how long you were working on this, but it was so exciting when you brought it into the Women's Community Building. Will you tell us a little more about it?
This is actually the second ISIS that I did. I did one some years before that was in a Peace March in Ithaca. And I can't remember when I started on this one. I think I was definitely inspired by a story that Reggie Carpenter was telling about Sky Woman. And I was so enchanted by this. And again, the image of the Egyptian goddess, who I realized at the time is considered the protectress of women and children. So I thought that was very appropriate. And of course, her breast is featured. And breast cancer has not touched me or too many people that I know directly, but I was very connected with Brigid. We had been involved with the Ribbon Project some decades before. Family Reading Partnership was on the horizon, and it was good to just pitch right in.
And I think that Isis was in the $400 as well. Jean Deming, who was the Commons coordinator at the time, got it. And I would have loved to have photographs of where all these quilts are in where they are. Maybe sometime we'll be able to bring those all together. So that was the very last, the 122nd final quilt. So how did we, I don't know how we did that many at the event. And in the end, there was $37,000 that was raised, which was extraordinary with the raffle quilt. Yeah. And Anne and Andi, do you want to tell just a little bit about what that meant in dollars? You know, we knew that it was so much more than a fundraiser, and how much it meant to Ithaca for visibility and awareness. But the dollars really helped too. So, yeah.
I remember our first year budget was, I think it was like $3,200 for a year. The second year was close to that. Everybody was a volunteer. It was mostly people helping. We were just, Ithaca Red Crisis gave us that room. So when Quilted with Care happened, the auction alone was was a year's budget, not to mention, and then all the other quilts. So, what it did, there's two things I would say. Financially, it suddenly allowed us to be in the women's community building, to have offices, to have another separate office where we would talk to people privately. It allowed us to grow our library, but the biggest thing it did is it brought us into the community, and so these sort of small services that we had, like we had a service called the Information Network, which was, when people were diagnosed and they didn't know who to talk to, and they want to know who's the good doctors, who are the good doctors, and and how do I make these decisions? Again, in Anne's experience, trying to make these life-changing decisions, knowing nothing. We couldn't give recommendations. We weren't, we couldn't give medical advice. We couldn't say who was good, who we thought were the good doctors. So we created this, and at first it was very small, this information network, which was people who had been through it, and we always waited till they were out and were a couple of years out, who were willing to share their experiences. And it could be anything, how to talk to their kid, how to talk to young kids, what it's like to lose your hair, what was your experience with different doctors. So that allowed us to help people find the information they needed, because they could talk to people who were a couple of years out and were willing to share just a myriad of different avenues of information. And that grew, because then we heard from a lot more people. And all of our support groups grew. Our support group facilitators grew. Everything grew because we had this amazing event, and it had been going on in the planning for like over a year. And I just wanted to say, because this was definitely, from my experience of it, this was Brigid and Anne. This was not, I just stood by in just amazement. And when Brigid said earlier, it's just amazing how it just came together. That's people. Wonderful people. Wonderful people. And Brigid. What I remember about Brigid, and I had never met her before, she was Anne's friend, it was a love story. There was so much love. There was so much love between them, and then it expanded to everybody, and it was like a love fest. But what I remember is, I never met Brigid when she didn't have like this stack of notebooks and papers flying all over, and she'd come into the office, and I just thought, how does she keep track of all these? How does she keep track of all this? There was so
Bryn and Kristin and
yes, and that's true. But Brigid was the one that I saw. So it just changed everything. It made us from this little network for people who already wanted to connect, to being a resource that was out there for people who maybe wouldn't have thought of it, before. And we started getting calls from people on their way out of the doctor's offices. when they were diagnosed. We were often the first call that they, or I don't know, we were the first call, but we were one of the early calls that they made.
And just to, tack onto that, we had a hotline too,
Yes.
which was really important, because as soon as we took turns, with the hotline, and, as soon as somebody called the hotline, they didn't have to wait for 48 hours to hear back from somebody. We called them right back, and if they wanted to talk to someone who had a specific kind of breast cancer, we put them in touch with someone from our network that had that similar cancer. So there was that immediate connection, with the information that they needed. So, I mean, that was, I think, a really important, part of what we offered.
That means so much to know that, all of those things, you know, to know that in more detail. I mean, again, we felt, I think all of us felt the first couple quilts coming in, and all of the people who said, I'll help. All of the people who said, I'll make a quilt. I mean, think about that, 122 people who felt touched enough that they would make a quilt and and share their story. It's quite extraordinary. There's a saying that if something is important enough, you find a way. And I felt like that from the moment that Anne shared, that they were going to gather together to help each other. And I thought, oh my gosh, the rest of us, as women, we've got to help. And of course, quilt making is that beautiful common thread. And so we can't say enough what a good fit. I mean, it really was a perfect fit. And Melanie Towner's here, who led the effort in 2000 to do it again, and she's got all the photographs from there that the Tompkins County Quilters Guild has in its archive, and that's where all these will go to keep them company. But let's take some time now to hear from the audience. I know that Judith Ashton was there because she has some quilts in this basket that came from that, and will you please, even if you don't have a quilt to share, if you heard about it or were there in the audience, we'd love your stories to tell.
And if people want to go up to the front to show, it'll show on the video as well.
Okay.
So you don't have to go up front.
Should we?
I'll hold your quilt.
Do you want to say anything, Judith, or we can show your quilts? Not that you have to go first, because Sherry has something to share too. So.
I'll show it.
Oh, Sandy Van Zyl.
May I pass the mic to you?
So this is Judith Ashton.
I loved this quilt when I saw it, and I was at a point where I was hoping for grandchildren. So to me, this was in the hope test for the grandchildren. We have 4, but it still was in my closet. I'm waiting for just the right kid. Yeah. So I didn't know the quilter, but you did.
She still comes to Quilter's Corner.
Yeah, it really is such a beautiful one. And then I've got one other small one. I actually won several of the auctions, but these are the only 2 I could find.
You're lucky, I didn't get my quilt.
I'm waiting for someone in the audience to say, oh, I did against it. What
That's
is
part
that
of the
one?
story. Donna Hanley.
This one I did send to my mother, and unfortunately, this was one that she hung that had a window opposite it. So it's greatly faded from the colors that.
That's
Is that? Yeah, the
Does it
other
show the
one you
hand
could hardly-
quilting on the back? I think it is it hand quilting?
Yes,
I
that's-
think that's
yes,
one of the
that's-
special parts about it. Imagine someone spent all that time. Thank you for bringing it. Do you have any memories of being there in the audience?
Oh, yes, Ithaca and I went.
Yeah.
We were so excited to be there, and couldn't wait to start bidding. I remember the desserts also.
We knew those desserts would work. We just knew it. Sherry, did you want to say anything?
I was saying to Bridget, I remember our daughters were friends in high school. They were 15 or 16 at that time, and they helped hold up the quilts. And I don't know, my daughter didn't turn into a quilter. I think it skips a generation, but I was happy to share that day with her.
Cheryl, you had a quilt in for sure, and I think you did, that was auctioned. I thought, maybe not that year.
Dolls.
Ah, yes, there were some dolls, yeah.
Two quilts over here as well.
Steffi hasn't been.
Okay,
Okay. Hi, so, I think this must have been from the second issue.
Steffi, I'm gonna bring you the mic,
Oh, okay.
unless you wanna come up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then we'll. Welcome.
So I bid on this quilt. I think that there was a bit of an exchange going on. And it was made by Karen Baum, who has become a really good friend. It turns out that we have birthdays very close to each other. So at Casawasco, we've often had birthday celebrations, and I've always loved this quilt.
Oscar?
I brought two quilts that I got at the second auction. The one that I got at the first auction, I just showed to the guild members in February, and I made a photo of it, and it is on our listserv, but where it is in my house is a mystery. But I remember Judith and I, so we went to both the first one, the two of us went together. And this one is from the second one. And it was so exciting. So when 2 years later, we brought our husbands along, and I know my husband was frowning. And that's when I was always sewing, but I never quilted. But I started quilting, and I had a quilt in the auction, and that is this one. And Judith won this one. I was a beginner quilter, but you know my love of orange. Being Dutch and all, it has to be orange. So this was a pattern, obviously, but my husband was not a happy camper to find out how much I paid for some of those quilts. But you know, later on, I also have a little story that I went to the Women's Community Center when I had an iffy mammogram, and that was when my kids were still a lot younger. And it ended up nothing good, but then I talked to Bob. So that was a very good experience. And then when I ended up having breast cancer so many years later, I went to the Ithaca I went to the Cancer Research Center, and they were very helpful. And right now, as we said before, our guild makes bags for the folks that go to chemo, and we make those little pillows, and we do all kinds of variety of other things.
So there's another impact, and so Afka, you actually went from sewing to quilt making as part of your going to the auction, and
No,
okay, all right.
I always sewed, but
Yeah.
I might have been more, I don't know if that is totally true.
Okay, we won't say that as a fact, but I can say.
No, it isn't true, because when I was pregnant with the daughter who's gonna be 51, I made a quilt, I pieced a quilt, and that was way back in the Netherlands, and I did not know anything about quilting, so I pieced the top, And a lot later, when she was an adult, I actually quilted it.
All right, so we can't claim Afka, but I can bet you that Cindy Slothauer will tell you that people came into Quilter's Corner after that, after seeing quilts and Wegmans in different places. I'm certain of it, and joined the quilting friendship circle that that many of us share. Does anyone else have stories to tell or quilts to show or memories of Quilted with Care? Casey. We can't quite bring your quilt to the front of the room, but isn't it gorgeous?
So as you've heard, the bidding was fast and furious, and many of us were like going home empty-handed. And we also, Elsie's version of that quilt is red, and we all fell in love with it and bought raffle ticket after raffle ticket and raffle ticket, and did not come home with the raffle quilt. So we went to Elsie and said, Elsie, we need to have that quilt. And so she created the patterns. She had, I think it was Quilter's Corner when it was that community corner. She had workshops. So every month, I think about 8 or 10 of us would go in and we'd learn how to make one block. And then at the end, we learned how to make the border. And at first I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? This is 10,000 applique stitches. But Bridget had mentioned in the beginning, you quilt for many different reasons. Well, I had 2 little boys who did t-ball and soccer and ice hockey, and I'm like not a sports person. But every time I could go to their games and quilt. So I'd bring one of the little blocks and do my applique, and felt like it was worthwhile. And little did they know that I hardly knew what they were doing on the field at all.
Cheering with your stitches.
Peggy, I don't have the photograph, but I think you had a quilt that you donated in the first go around.
Actually, I can bring them. I was one of the new people at Kendall when Kendall was new. And we had recently had an exhibit. And with a good friend, we had made a group of 4 quilts that on the theme Seasons at Kendall. And we decided to have 4 cats. One was batting a butterfly, one was disturbing the Christmas tree. And we decided, the 2 of us that had made these quilts, that we would donate the set of 4 to the auction. And as a side, Nancy Bond, who was a member of the guild early on and a fellow Kendall resident, bought one of the quilts, and it was hanging in a room in the health center when she died within the last year.
Anyone else with a story? Yes.
Was your quilt any, were they like
That was it.
Only we could put that up on the screen.
I don't really have anything to say about this, except that I loved all of them, and I wanted all of them, but I just got the one, so is there any way to...
Thank you, I'm glad to know it.
That is so beautiful. Anyone else with stories? There were others who had quilts there or were there. Oh.
Nobody must have some
Any other stories? Okay. See, Andi and Andi, you have last thoughts or last things that you wanted to say, or Kristin? I'm putting you on the spot because we didn't talk about last thoughts, but I thought you might have.
Well, the quilt that I had wanted from Wegmans, it was actually kind of nice because it hung in Wegmans for a very, very long time, and so a lot more people got to share it and to see it, and it was just a wonderful thing. So I would go visit it from time to time.
It was wonderful there. Well, I think we have to especially thank Ann and Andi and all of the women who were the founders of the Ithaca Breast Cancer Alliance for the years of supporting and giving our community something really special to bring us together and to help us forward. So thank you for all of you.
I was just gonna say, this is, how many years ago? I don't know, 1996, so 27 years ago, okay. So the fact that we're all still here, still talking about this is quite remarkable, because the event was just so special. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of the people who quilted, all of the people who bought quilts, all of the people who supported the Breast Cancer Alliance through the years, and for all of you for coming and listening to us reminisce. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Mary?
I just have an announcement that's actually not on this history per se, but on another possible quilting project. In 3.5 years, in 2026, it's going to be the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And there's an idea afloat of having a national quilt on the Washington Mall. And I just have a few limited flyers here. This is the beginning. It's 3.5 years from now. It can begin to take off. If anybody's interested, just send it to, a friend, and we'll see how it goes. The idea is hopefully there'll be quilts coming from all 50 states, perhaps every July 4th from here to then. Whatever quilts are made can have, be brought together on the Washington Mall, and then it'll just grow and grow and grow. And of course, textiles are such an important metaphor. And we are living in a country that is ripped apart. That our social fabric is completely ripped apart. And quilting can be a process of, uniting that, and that there are quilters all over the political spectrum. And anyway, if people are interested, you can pick up a flyer.
Is there a website or not yet? Or
what?
Is there a website or not yet?
Well, there's not really a website. There's a Gmail. So if anybody's interested, you can
Contact you, Mary?
my name is actually not on the flyer, but you can, just write in Gmail and just send the idea along to anybody you know that might be interested. So this is very much the seed, and just very much to see where it might go, and it might not go anywhere. It might, in 3.5 years, it might be like New York State has a huge amount and Alabama has a little amount. Not naming any names of states. Thank you, Mary. Consider that seed planted. You never know. When you dream alone, it stays a dream. When you dream together, it can become reality, which is how so many things happen, and so many things happen with women in quilt making as well. Zoe, did you have were you going to share about the next one and the Community Quilt Making Center grand opening, which I'm just sharing as it's all tumbling out. So the Community Quilt Making Center's grand opening will be on the 23rd of April. It's a Sunday, and everyone's invited to come. It's a beautiful vision of Peggy Dunlop, actually, who's in our room today, and lots of people, of course, just like Quilted with Care, have decided that vision is their vision as well, and they're carrying it forward, and that is to open the door to quilt making for all, regardless of personal resources. So many people are working on that, and you're all invited to come on the 23rd.
And in continuing with this series, next month we are doing Community Quilt Making for Good with the Ellis Hollow Quilters Guild, Dryden Thimble Therapy, and the Brooktondale Community Center, and they're each going to be talking about different quilt raffles that they have done over the years and the various programs and projects that they have funded through their own communities. And just another way of bringing the rural townships into Ithaca, because it is one of those things that we are the history center for all of Tompkins County, but we are located in downtown, so it can sometimes be hard to highlight rural histories. And then in June, we have a History Forge Place textile series. If you're unfamiliar, History Forge is a digital content platform, and we're going to be talking about the different ways you can use this set of digitized census records dating back to the 1880s to find textile and fabric workers in Ithaca and then search out historic textile works within the county. Also, this exhibit will be up through October and November, and I will probably pull together a couple more events. If you'd like to stay in the loop, I would encourage email, but if email is not as much your thing, I encourage you stopping by every month and checking out the posters on our doors. All right, thank you all so much.
And Zoe, right now, everyone can go in and see Not So Fast, right? The exhibit is still open this evening if anyone wants to go and see it. And thank you again for taking time to come this evening and be a part of the magic and wonder of revisiting 27 years ago in Quilted with Care. Thank you, everyone.